Go ahead.
This is a regular meeting of the Warren City School District Board of Education on October 18th, 2022, starting at 5:30 p.m., held in the Warren G. Harding High School cafetorium with live stream available at warrencityschools.org. This meeting is a meeting of the Warren City Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participating during the meeting as indicated in agenda item number 11. Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Here.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Here.
Mrs. Patterson?
She's absent with leave.
Mr. Walker?
Will be arriving momentarily.
He's right there.
He's in the room.
Have him stay here.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fowley?
Here. Would you all please rise to salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Executive session under the provisions of Ohio Revised Code 121.22, the Warren City Board of Education recessed to executive session at 5:33. For A, consideration of appointment, employment, promotion, etc. of public employees. C, conference with attorney involving pending legal action. And E, preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations with public employees.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Patterson, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Who?
Mr. Walker?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes. Steve
A
didn't
little
make it.
premature.
Yeah, a little premature, sorry about that. Communications.
Where's Julian? Julian's not here. Julian's not
No,
here.
where's Julian? We're waiting on Mr. Walker. Steve, don't come up the stairs.
If you like to make a grand entrance.
Mr. Shiro, communications?
There's no communications this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes. Mrs. Scortino, the treasurer's report?
Happy to report tonight that Steve and I attended a school funding workshop last week that was held by the company that we purchase our forecast software from. And I thought it was very informative in terms of getting to the behind the scenes of the school funding formula and identifying some of the inequities involved in it. And I'll be going into illustration of this in further detail in the November meeting when I give the forecast update. But a couple of the things that I found interesting was they are when we receive our base funding per student, their formula uses average teacher salaries or average salaries in general to fund positions based upon the number of students you have. Currently, the state is using 2018 average salaries, and that will not change in this biennium. So that, as you can tell, is extremely outdated information. It's unrealistic to think that no school district has received any inflationary increases or step increases in their salaries from year to year. So that is one of the things that keeps our funding formula lower than what it actually should be if you were doing a fair funding formula. The other factors, as we're seeing, next year we will be in a triennial update. You're going to start to see the impact of the housing boom and sales of houses. So what we should be seeing is increases in property values, and actually you're seeing increases in adjusted gross income nationwide. So those factors are what determine our local capacity when determining what your share is of the base funding formula. So as those factors increase, that causes our state funding share to decrease. So then that in turn makes us even responsible more for our share in the base cost. So, and then finally, the other factor is just the level of what they're capable, the state is capable of funding this formula at, you know, and what the calculation is as to what we should be receiving if you're going by this model, and what we're actually able to receive is significantly different. So I wanted to point out that as you go to Capitol Conference, the same workshop that we sat through is going to be at Capitol Conference. So I believe it's on Monday, one of the sessions, and it's called the Fair School Funding Plan Update. And I encourage you all to sit through it, because I think it, you know, just gives a nice perspective and easy to understand, because the funding formula is very complicated. So it gives you some good insight into that, and I would just encourage you to participate in that.
Thank you. Superintendent's report.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to do a very special report that we've been waiting for, and this is going to be regarding some projects within the Warren City School District with a strong focus on the Recreation and Wellness Center. At this time, I'd like to yield the floor to John Lacey, our Executive Director of Business Operations, and Kim Phillips from Phillips Koenig Architects. Gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I left each of your spaces some, this will be the only one you get, color copies of kind of where we've, some of the major things we've done over the last couple of years, where we're at, where we plan on being. I've also asked you guys to call met Kim Phillips from Phillips Koenig. You know, the first kind of major thing we took care of was the facade, the portion of the facade, and it's still, to this day, I think they did a fantastic job of that. Really looks good. The new drainage is in, and all those posts are now straight. And so that, I think that's a real positive move. This is a finished picture, for those that haven't been back, off of Woodland, where we demoed the house, put in lanes for the buses, and we also have it fenced, so it really is not, you can't be used to cut through when buses or deliveries aren't happening. And to kind of get an idea here, this is at pickup time at the high school, where we have, even though we lost a decent amount of space, we still have the ability to put the 14 buses all in line. And the dismissal has, and the drop-off has all worked pretty smoothly. Drop-off, they line up in 4 rows of 3 to 4. And as buses come off in groups of 2, then the buses dismiss and 4 come in. So the other 2 lanes that you see here are actually parked in double with the buses when they come through. This is one that we haven't talked about in a while, but has still been near and dear to my heart. This is Jefferson. We started a project with collaboration from the city to put a pavilion at Jefferson. So Jefferson is where the junior high team practices, and also the little kids are at. So at Jefferson, this is the rear, and you kind of see what we had to do with the property once we got into it is we had to connect the sewer and create a new electric meter. We would not have pulled enough power from the school, and who knows potentially what kind of sewer line issues we could have created had we just gone right into the school. So those back 2 doors are bathrooms, and the side door there you see is the side service door entrance. We have a metal roof on it. And you kind of get an idea that the Jefferson property is really looks great right now. Throughout the football season, with the Little Raiders having playing there, even though we don't have electric yet in the building, they're still using the concession area to sell sodas and other things there. But this whole section, I talked to the Little Raiders people today, and they have been thrilled with being in a location that has just, it's more like a true park setting than what Deemer Park was. So they've been really happy with this relationship. You can kind of see the front of it right there. And its proximity to the football field. So as this goes, and we basically also created another 60-yard field last year so the Little Raiders could actually practice while the junior high was practicing, and then kind of if there were any conflicts, we did have at least kind of a field and a half there. So then I went back and said, well, what did everything look like? We want to thank Frank Bozak for some of these photos. You can tell which ones are his. This is what everything looked like back probably May of 21. Very beautiful looking property. I think this was right before, you can see it was right before graduation in May of 21. And that is the evening of graduation in May of 21. And then a year later, and here we are. So, as I said, the groundbreaking, and things started to move very quickly with the groundbreaking. And then finally, here again, towards the beginning of the project, this is again the overview of where we're at from Woodland, off of Woodland. And here we have now, and this is the part you can like jump in and say, we have where the footers for the site work started before, and they are continuing to pour concrete. Even in this weather, it's okay. They said as long as the rain doesn't impact them. As you can see here, for football season, this is the home entrance. We created the gate space so the band can still go about 5 to 6 individuals across. The band can still come in. The biggest problem the band had was relearning the pregame routine because they were coming in from the opposite end zone. And for anybody that was in the band, it's all left turns when you come in from the home side. You come in from the opposite side, it's right turns. So it took a little time, and they did a nice job of adjusting with that. And again, this would be now from the visitor side, at the top of the stands on what that section looks like. Up in the upper left corner, that's the first thing that you saw happen, which was the stormwater retention area. That has now all been covered. It's partially paved, and I think has been, knock on wood, been performing just fine from what we've had so far. And then this is, again, the section from the outside, kind of where the edge of the softball field is. And as you can kind of see there, I guess this would be called our first permanent structure. That is the retaining wall that's up right on the outside of the softball field. And you can kind of see how we do have some. We've had a lot of trucks and everything going through there. So now, I think at this point, we're going to be keeping track of this on a, Frank Bozak has been doing this. And so this is going from day one to almost present, he told me. So you can see up there on the left, the huge mounds of dirt and soil and rock that are being moved, and there goes the band shell just about. For those that noticed on the east side, the band shell steel is still very well intact. You can see the W still leaning against the stands prominently. And as the area starts to develop, shape-wise, it's really starting to look like something. You walked in this evening to asphalt being poured, and that will, we're going to be changing the fence. crosswalk and to exit, they won't be able to go straight across anymore. We'll have barriers up and be looking to make sure that the buses can make the turns and such that they need to. So we will have this. This looks like it ended on Friday because the flags up. So Frank is keeping track of this. It's being done throughout the duration of the construction project here now. So now, we're not going through every diagram, don't worry. But I put two diagrams in here. So this is the main first floor. So as you're looking, the main entrance would be off of here. Oh, there. So the main entrance would be up here. And as we come in, the part below that main entrance would be the bistro. We see the tracks. We see, again, where the basketball courts are. Those are not necessarily going to be basketball courts. They're all going to be multi-purpose courts. What is that dimension from? That's a 200-meter track, but from edge of track to edge of track, 300 yards. 300 yards. Almost 100 yards will be within that from the edge of the track to the edge of the track. On the far right side, auto park, you'll see kind of that clinic area also that we've talked about in the past. You have 22 pages because you're going to have a breakdown of every section instead of just an overview like this.
Yeah, so you can look at each individual chunk. It was so big, we had to break it up, right? So you'll notice that we just kind of work sections here, around the building, so you'll be able to hone in a little bit more. Just acclimate you. Interrupt you on for a second. Bottom of the page that you're seeing here is the current high school. Right up here is the football field. Now you kind of get that orientation. Along with the new big facility in the middle, a couple of things that get introduced in the existing high school in the multi-purpose room is one, esports room. One is golf simulation, golf team practice room.
Can't excuse me.
Yep. Could you get Kendall?
I can't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. I can talk a little better, yeah. So if you start with that esports and golf simulator area, those are the only areas really within the existing high school that we are interrupting, if you will, or repurposing, okay? And that's right down the middle. Then you have the auxiliary gym just to the right of that, that area we were just talking about, and further to the right where John was talking about the clinic spaces. Those get access from the back parking lot because in the process of the way things were going, the potential, I think 99% potential tenants, if you will, wanted more space. So we had to really kind of even expand upon the first floor clinic, which takes up about 10,000 square feet. The second level, which you'll see on the second floor slide, takes up about 3,000 or 4,000 square feet on the second floor. But between the gym, the auxiliary gym, and the clinic space that John was pointing out is the new robotics area and competition space for them, which is in the lower right-hand corner, basically, of the building, right? Well, it's right up above, John. Right up above is all that area that's the robotics, and the area to the north of that as well. So that you know, that's also got a second floor in it, and we're looking to get some glass that would be able to, you'd be able to see the kids that are in robotics, just not hidden away in the thing from the second floor as you would look down on a robotics competition. So we think that that's going to promote that activity quite a bit down the line, more so than now. John, if you want to jump back just a second. Just to the north of the main building on that angled section is where the new locker rooms are going to be, that we are intending, progress-wise, to have completed for next season's football season. The rest of the place won't be done, but the locker rooms hopefully will all be completed. If you want to jump to the second floor then, John. Second floor area, if you circulate around from upper left, coming around to the bottom to where the existing high school is again, this is where all the sensory and fitness rooms are. And the second floor walking track, you'll see that the basketball courts are still kind of shown there, but it's just a donut hole is basically what it is. So you have a secondary track up for walking and so forth, not for the track team. And all around the perimeter, you have cardio areas that are for all types of exercise activity. So basically, the second floor is really exercise relative to not only school students, but outside participants if that happens. And then you've got in the lower right-hand corner, again, the upper floor clinic and the upper section of the robotics area. Then to the north of that is the roof of the locker room, which is intended to be a combination of green and tiled roof. Now, you've heard all of this before, so you guys are pretty familiar with it all, right? But I want to say one thing. I want to commend the board and commend the staff, commend the administration for getting a jump start. You know, we had this discussion. Is it going to play out the way that we think? Construction-wise, we appear to have gotten a break with the late summer weather. It could have been a mud hole, but it was not. So we've gotten a real good jump start on things. The foundations that you saw in some of the photographs that John had are 50, 60, maybe 65% completed at this point. We're going to start going vertical here in about 10 days with the block. Don't get excited. It's not the big thing.
Block excites me, though.
Yeah, but no. So the block on the north side, which is the main wall that separates the lockers from the main building, is going to start to go in, so that we get a jump start on that, and continuing. So things are coming along very nicely, and for that we thank you. For it would have been delays would have been not to the benefit of the project. So it worked out real well, and I appreciate what you're continuing to do as well. So John, if you'd like to jump to your fence.
Yeah, so our fencing will hang windscreen around the fencing. So with the fence, we'll be able to, as I said, these are different sections of the fence that we will have. You will see just the generic. You'll see one with a rendering from the football field from about the 50-yard line. You'll see another one here with rendering from the main entrance. You'll see some of the highlights on the fencing as to what it will be used for. Bistro, esports, robotics also down there, so we kind of have that. And now what you're going to see is some renderings. Some of the renderings we've shown before were not kind of final renderings, they were more conceptual. So what we're dealing with here right now is we've kind of made a determination based on talking in athletic council and some other areas. We want to stay with the old W. And again, I'm assuming we'll have this doctored up a little bit. The we can change it between gold, white, red, you know, for throwback games even, and some of these other things. So you can kind of get visually here kind of a cleaner depiction of where things are going to go. Again, this view I think is really kind of neat. Again, the main entrance. And then this, again, has not been seen before. Ken, now where is so this would be where the main track is and everything. And then where would the doors be?
I don't know if she had a rendering on the entrance side, but it's around the corner. Yeah, so it's access from the main back parking lot. We just ran out of, basically we ran out of room on the site when we went to expand. So that's the clinic end, or the view you might see from the softball field side.
Oh, okay.
And that completes the presentation. A couple of the other things, one of the major things we accomplished this summer also is we have 3 more buildings with brand new boilers. Karen was able to use some of the ESSER money, the ARP money, to use for improving the ventilation and whatnot. So even though, again, our buildings were about somewhere between 10 to 15 years old, some of the original buildings, the boilers were just huge and took up a lot of space and were not as efficient as what we have now. So Harding, Lincoln, and Willard each have new boilers, and then the other 2 buildings had boilers put in probably about 4 years ago, I think, and then also the admin building has a new boiler system. So we've been busy, and but again, I want to thank the board and the rest of the admin team for. I think things went pretty well. One of Steve's main concerns was not disrupting day-to-day activities for the kids. And, I think the football team was probably the most disrupted simply because of the amount of time they had to go between halftime. So, again, but they were happy, I think, to do it and had no problem. So, any questions?
If I could, before we go to questions, I just want to add a couple things. You know, some of the things we've talked as considerations when we're trying not to disrupt education here, and the way we have the layout, we're in a perfect spot that we're able to get as much done without disrupting. You know, even with like the Woodland entrance, and trying to ensure that we're not changing ingress and egress of buses, student drop-off, et cetera. We had the construction fence. We've moved the construction fence back as not to disrupt 4th grade swimming. The bus wasn't able to get to the door that the kids went in, so now the buses can do a 3-point turn, and then the kids can go in the side door. Well, it doesn't matter a lot in September and October, but I'm sure the kids in January and February coming out of the pool are going to appreciate having a warm bus 20 feet from the pool instead of 200 feet. So we recently moved the fence along the back. We talked about moving the fence in front because we're at that stage in the program. It was important that we had a barrier between cars, vehicles, and our students when they're crossing. The construction trailer was set to be in the front lot. We moved it to the back lot where we already had prepared, so it's in the back of the building and not accessing where handicap spaces, visitor spaces, et cetera, were going to be. Along those lines, because of the moving of the fence, we lost some visitor parking, handicap spaces, but it was important that when we built this that we made the ramp handicap accessible from the parking lot all the way into the building, and that's being done by Miller Yount, if it's not already done, as well as having the handicap spaces being the closest spaces because they've been moved 3 times in this project. So we're constantly trying to find ways that we have something that needs done. So what's going to be the impact to the students? What's going to be the impact to our visitors and our guests so that we could minimize that? Basketball season, everyone's going to be coming in the M entrance. The fencing may be where it's at, may not. We'll determine that as the project dictates. But, we're going to have to change things up a little bit and be mindful. But if the project is on time, then our locker room section of the building is anticipated to be available as early as July, August of 23. And so that would bring back our normal operations for that end of the program. So that the most disrupted group, which would be the football team hiking up the field, we saved about $40,000 by doing that for our 6 home games. And so, again, it wasn't optimal, but it's what we needed to do, get through the season, and hopefully, given our timelines and the weather we've had, that we could make sure that doesn't have to happen for next season. And I think our first game or two may be away. I think I got to check the schedule. But just, keeping in mind, we wanted our students to have normalcy if they're coming off a bus, if they're coming out of their cars and getting into the building, that this is happening, but not disrupting the life of education here at the building.
Thank you.
So, your questions, John?
No.
I want to make really clear too, Steve and I have talked about this, that, we have a lot of information at the board. I now have in my possession, for those that are bored on the weekends, a 250-page, I think at least 250-page, what do you call that, blueprint, design prints of everything. Where the outlets are going, I suppose, and
Yeah, if insomnia becomes a problem, give me a call.
so we have, anything that you might have a question on, we're more than happy to answer, because we've really tried to engage all the parties that will be involved with this. From the concession areas to the band and even some of the, all the teams we could think of in between that could use this. So please feel free to ask as you go through this, as we go through this together.
Kim, thank you. John, also, thank you.
And that concludes the superintendent's report for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Shiro. Board of Education Committee reports. Athletics.
I don't have anything.
Mr. Nicholson is out of town at a soccer match. He's not in Warren. Wanted me to just remind athletic council members that we'll be meeting this Thursday in the principals conference room at 5:15 for an athletic council meeting.
Thank you. Financial Advisory. Mrs. Doherty.
I don't have anything.
Board Policies and Guidelines. Mrs. Doherty.
Yes, just you'll see on the agenda tonight that we have the first reading for a list of policies that we met, I think it was 2 weeks ago, to update and review. So those are on the agenda.
Thank you. And Mrs. Patterson is absent, so there will be no TCTC report. Any old business?
Oh, you missed legislative. You forgot me. Legislative liaison.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I skipped. And you actually have something.
I
know.
do. Actually, it's just a reminder. The Ohio School Boards Association, OSBA, will have their town hall next Tuesday, October 25th, starting at 5:30. It's virtual, and if you are going to attend, log into your OSBA account and just get registered for that. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any old business? Any new business? Mrs. Doherty, on page 3, the treasurer's recommendations.
Treasurer's recommendations, minutes. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the September 2022 board minutes be approved as submitted.
Second.
Any questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Mr. Fowley?
Yes. Page 4, Mrs. Lamperos, the monthly financial statement.
Monthly financial statement. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the September 2022 financial statement and short-term investments made by the treasurer during September 2022, Exhibit A, pages 46 to 47, be approved as submitted.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes. And the motion carries. On page 6, Mrs. Doherty.
2022-23 co-curricular budget and purpose statements. It is recommended the resolution listed below establishing 2022 to 2023 co-curricular budget and purpose statements be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes. On page 7, Mr. Walker.
Approve the application, accept the grant, and approve the grant appropriations. It is recommended the resolution listed below to approve the application, accept the grant, and approve the grant appropriation, A, be approved as submitted.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, please call the roll.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 8, Mrs. Lamperos.
Superintendent's recommendations. Change in date of regular board meeting. It is recommended the resolution listed below, changing the date of a regular board meeting from Tuesday, November 15, 2022 to Tuesday, November 29, 2022, be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mr. Walker, on page 9.
Revision of board policies due to modification of compliance officers. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the revision of board policies due to modification of compliance officers A through M be approved as submitted.
Thank you.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 11, Mrs. Doherty.
Board policies, first reading. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the adoption of board policies, first reading, A through V, be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? I want to thank the policy committee. This is a lot of work and a lot of reading. Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Lamperos, on page 13.
Board policies review. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the review of board policies be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 14, item 5, Mr. Walker.
Approving plans and drawings for the renovations and additions project. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding approving plans and drawings for the renovations and additions project be approved as submitted.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 15, Mrs. Doherty.
Recommendation of the CMR to accept certain bids for its construction project. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding approving the recommendation of the CMR to accept certain bids for its construction project be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Lamperos, on page 17.
Agreements, contracts, and/or leases. It is recommended the resolution listed below entering into agreements, contracts, and/or leases A be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mr. Walker, on page 18.
Field trip. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding field trip A be approved as submitted.
Second?
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scortino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Good luck, first robotics teams. Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 19, Mrs. Doherty.
Ohio Department of Education certification for Ohio Teachers Evaluation System and Ohio Principal Evaluation System. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding the Ohio Department of Education certification for credentialed Ohio Teachers Evaluation System and Ohio Principals Evaluation evaluators be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Lamperos, on page 20, item 10.
Establishing educational requirements for substitute teachers for the 2022-2023 and 2023-2024 school years. It is recommended the resolution below establishing educational requirements for substitute teachers be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mr. Walker, on page 22.
Tuition reimbursement. It is recommended the resolution listed below for tuition reimbursement be approved as submitted.
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes, and the motion carries. Mrs. Doherty, you get the best one. Item 12 on page 22.
Acceptance of gifts. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding acceptance of gifts be approved as submitted. Starting with Buena Vista to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $200. Enzo Restaurant and Banquet to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $100. Franklin Pharmacy Healthcare to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $200. The Living Room to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $100. Salvatore's Italian Grill to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $100. Sunrise Inn of Warren to Lincoln, a monetary donation of $100. W3 Financial Group to Lincoln, school supplies estimated at $200. And Warren City Federation of Women's Clubs to Warren City Schools personal clothing items, estimated value of $1,000.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or concerns? And a big thank you. Thank you very, very much. Every board meeting, there are gifts to the school system, and we are very, very, very grateful. Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes, and the motion carries. On page 25, Mrs. Lamperos.
Personnel recommendations. It is recommended the resolution listed below regarding personnel items A through N be approved as submitted, and that will take you through to page 43.
May I have a second?
Second.
Questions or concerns? Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
I am abstaining from section M, line 4, item 4, line 11, which is on page 40. Otherwise, yes.
Mr. Foley?
Yes, and the motion carries. We come to agenda item 11, public participation. Any resident may speak for 3 minutes. One person has signed up, a Mr. Brandon Simpson. And if you could state your name and address, I would appreciate it.
Brandon Simpson at 733 Glenwood Street Northeast.
Thank you.
Hello board members. I have been in the Warren City School District system since birth, all the way from preschool. What I would like to speak about is the bullying problem I see and have experienced in your school system. My father has always taught me to keep my morals straight, set my goals high, be kind, and to always work hard. I cycled through several Warren schools and landed myself at Lincoln in 5th grade. While I didn't have very many issues at the other Warren schools, I unfortunately cannot say the same for the time at Lincoln. I got and continue to get high grades at Lincoln and am planning on attending YSU next year, but not without constant bullying, interruption, and physical interactions from others at school, mostly from one group of boys. During these times, I had to go to teachers many times and felt like most of my pleas for help were ignored. I was once cornered in the bathroom and choked for something as small as refusing to let somebody have my fidget spinner. This is when I went to my father. Being a former Army soldier and bail bondsman, my father started to teach me self-defense during this time. He began to teach me to stand up for myself, and he told me that there was only a few rules to follow. 1, under no circumstances to hit a woman, never run my mouth without being able to back it up. If somebody is talking down to me, I need to ignore it and to tell school staff and my father. If it comes to a physical altercation, defend myself at all costs, win any way I can, and to make a statement so they won't do it again. These problems got so bad that I wanted to be homeschooled, became depressed, and did not want to go to school. I know I am not the only one experiencing this. This goes across all genders and races. I know of people who have thought of suicide, and I know of places this has occurred. Some of these kids have been forced to be moved into other school districts, but there are some who are not capable of moving and are forced to endure this torture. This is not something you should be taking lightly, members of the board. I eventually got the mentality and learned to stop trying to get help from other adults and to take care of things myself because I have lost all trust in the staff of the school. My father has helped me quite a bit, and I got most people to leave me alone by the end of 5th grade, even with it cut off by COVID. All except for a few people, which I will not state their names out of respect in hopes that they will one day have a realization as to what they're doing. I was in online learning in 6th grade and didn't face many issues because of it. 7th grade, I will say, was much easier than 5th, but I still had the same problems with those people. This year, however, has been a living nightmare. The first 9 weeks are not finished yet, and there have been loads of problems for me, and from what I have seen, others as well. It seems like there has been a failure on the school's part to do anything about the chaos that is unfolding under their watch. This situation has brought me to my father to utter disgust at this point, where the situation where these 2 boys intentionally got off the bus even after being suspended and got off on my bus stop to jump me. I defended myself the best I could, but ended up with a black eye and a gash on my brow. Police were called and didn't show up for 3 hours. They told my dad there isn't anything they can do. I have felt at this point there's not anyone to help me but to get someone's attention and to make a statement. This boy still after jumping did not seem to get any punishment and continued to harass me in class. I texted my
Thank you.
May I please finish?
You have 3 minutes. That's what's allocated.
He's got less than a paragraph left.
Fine.
I texted my father, and even though we both wanted to do much more, he told me to give him a warning. Obviously, this did no good because I eventually had to make this statement to everyone and put him into the table. I am truly sorry that it has come to this, but that no one is in my corner at this point but my father. And when any person or animal is pushed into a corner, they will fight for their life, and I am sure you will do the same. I fully expected some form of punishment. I was directly told by your principals and staff that they can no longer give suspensions for these acts due to a law that was passed in the state of Ohio. That was why they were either not punished or punished so lightly, yet I got a 10-day suspension for my offense. When I was defending myself, I am now being told by my friends that these kids plan to shoot up my house or find me and beat me within an inch of my life. I have a 10-year-old sister who also goes to this school. She's been kept out of the school for her safety until I return, if I return. In closing, I say this to you, members of the board, staff present, and all parents present here today. It is our parents' right and duty to protect us, provide for us, and teach us right for wrong. Parents, if you are not doing this, do better. But the moment I get on that bus until I walk into my dad's protection once again, it is your responsibility of every member of the school system. I humbly request that you start doing yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Mrs. Scartino, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lamperos?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mrs. Doherty?
Yes.
Mr. Fowley?
Yes, and the motion carries. We are adjourned at 7:03.